Today we're going to take a trip down to the outskirts of Montevideo in Uruguay to talk about Club Atlético Peñarol. Peñarol were founded all the way back in 1891 under a different name, although if you ask their arch rivals Nacional, they might tell you 1914 is the correct year, and that is the source of a lot of beef between the two clubs, but we'll talk about that in a second. Back then, they were founded by workers from the National Railway Company. And that's actually a pretty common way that clubs of older origins got started. Railway workers starting a club just for themselves. And you can still see that in many clubs around the world today. Look for the term locomotiva as a part of the club's name in places like Zagreb and Moscow. In South America, they are synonymous with black and yellow vertical stripes as their home colors. I love a straightforward badge for a club, and theirs is straightforward with it just being a shield with their black and yellow stripes vertically on top, 11 stars for the 11 players on the pitch. Here are your 3 key things about Peñarol. Peñarol won the first 2 editions of the Copa Libertadores back in 1960 and 61, and they have 5 overall titles, leaving them only behind Independiente and Boca Juniors of Argentina for all-time titles. Their rivals I mentioned before are Club Nacional de Football, who are in central Montevideo, and the 2 of them compete one of the biggest derbies and longest-standing derbies in the world, going all the way back to 1900. This Clásico is very important for Uruguayan people because the majority of the people in the country support one or the other of the clubs. And at the moment, Peñarol have the advantage as far as victories. They've met over 400 times. But those numbers change a little bit depending on if you subscribe to the fact that Peñarol started in 1914 or if their lineage goes back to the previous club. These numbers don't change too much for the Clásico, but the titles won in the country does. 5 titles were won before 1914, and if you don't take those into account, Nacional actually have more titles in the country than Peñarol. So it depends on who you're talking to for who's the best in the country, thus the beef I talked about earlier. As far as former players, let's talk about Alberto Spencer, who was one of their leading goal scorers and the all-time leading goal scorer overall in the Copa Libertadores. Second, I'd like to think that fans will shout the name of Diego Aguirre for many, many years. I looked him up and I wanted to learn a little bit more because he's played for the club in 2 stints and managed them in 2 stints for 2 seasons. But most importantly, they probably sing his name because he set up the key winning goal in a Clásico in the late 80s, where the club was down to 8 men and still won against Nacional, even though those 3 players were sent off all in one go. And as far as current players, Cruz Azul fans, take note that one of your players, Pablo Cepelini, is on loan at Peñarol at the moment. And second, let's talk about their captain, Walter Gargano, who's also one of their key defensive midfielders. So that's your rundown on Peñarol. This is a huge, massive club from South America, and our first one we talked about from Uruguay.